Hello everybody and welcome to my review for XCOM Chimera Squad. So XCOM Chimera Squad is a standalone spin-off set after XCOM 2 and kind of positions itself more as a narrative-driven game. Now I'm going to go with the assumption that most of you know what XCOM is and are roughly familiar with those previous games. This is, turn-based combat with a meta campaign for fighting against some sort of alien invasion. All the while, you're recruiting and upgrading characters and improving your base and technology to allow you to fight against even tougher enemies. That's basically XCOM. So Chimera Squad has three major changes to the XCOM formula that set it apart from previous games, and my review is going to focus on these primarily, and I'll cover each of them in detail. Now the first major addition is Breach Mode. As the Chimera Squad are somewhat of a special ops task force, every encounter in the game starts with a breach. Essentially, you have one or more entry points into an area, and you line up your squad and the order that you want them to enter. The different entry points will give you a general indication of what to expect going through there, such as the amount of enemies you'll face, the likelihood you're going to get shot back at, and then some modifiers to choosing the entry point itself. Now the modifiers will have different positives and sometimes negatives to the breach, such as increased defense, dodge, aim, or damage, but you can also get more nuanced modifiers, such as the last person who gets through this is going to have some sort of debuff like disabling their weapon. Doesn't always make sense, but that's just the way it is. In those situations, it's actually pretty fun to work out who should go where, who's best suited to the modifier that they're going to get, and who's going to have the, the debuff or the sacrifice. Another layer is that the team members can carry breach equipment like satchel charges for blowing open walls or even keycards for silent entry into certain areas. If you don't have the equipment with you, then you just can't use it and go through that way. Now there's also the type of breach that you want a team member to do. I haven't seen too much variation with this, but Terminal can use a healing breach to heal everyone on her way through, which is perfect for when you get a second or third breach in the same mission. Now sometimes you clear out an area and you move to the next, and you get a new breach mid-mission, and this can also be interesting for your equipment because you might have used your satchel charge on the first breach, but now you don't have it for the next one. Now when the breach actually occurs, everyone piles through their respective entry point and you have to pick your targets or run to cover. Enemies will be surprised, alert, or aggressive on the breach, meaning that they will either not act, they will use an ability, or they will fire back. So ideally taking out the aggressive enemies first, the ones that fire back, will probably be the safest way to go, but sometimes the surprised enemies are the easy instant kills and then they're not going to have their turn obviously, so again it's actually a pretty fun dynamic and trade-off choosing which one to go for first. Different characters will sometimes have different abilities during the breaches as well. Cherub can use his shield to direct incoming fire to him and tank damage, while Viper can use a toxic spit and poison an area. And you can always go with a default breach action which just fires your main gun, or you could choose to run to cover, which gives you a defensive bonus after the breach. Now during the breach, but after you've done your moves, the enemy will fire back, if at all, and then your squad will just run to cover and the traditional turn-based game begins. So generally, I think breaches are actually quite a cool concept and a fun idea. However, in Chimera Squad, they're just not executed that well. A lot of the time there's only one breach option, which kind of makes it feel pretty pointless that you have to even go through it at all. But the real problem is that you have no idea what you're breaching into. In some regards, it's kind of an interesting premise, and I think it might have worked for certain circumstances, but often there's windows, vents, skylights, and even like completely open parking lots and things like that. But you're just not able to see where you're going to run to, who you're going to fight, where you're going to get to cover, and, really forward plan properly. I just think designing a full breach would have been way more interesting, really knowing the layout or just knowing a part of the layout, and then maybe the other part's sort of shrouded due to your line of sight. Then you choose to line up some windows, say that you want to move here and then here, throw a grenade, and so on and so forth, and then you just execute it. But instead, you're sort of just blindly going through a door, and then you assess the situation and do what you can. And it's tough to know who to take out, because you don't know where you're going to run to cover. It just sort of happens. It's also strange to have flashbangs and other equipment, but not be allowed to toss them in first like you normally would do in a breach. And just remember that every mission starts with a breach, and there's sometimes multiple per mission, so it does just get quite repetitive in that regard. Like I said, I think not knowing could be interesting in certain situations, but not knowing every time just makes it kind of bland. The second major change to the formula to talk about is that the game is a narrative-focused story with unique characters instead of just recruits that you build up. So in the campaign, there's 11 unique characters that you can get access to over time, and they have preset classes and abilities, and they never deviate from that. Now you can place equipment on them and modifiers on their weapons, but that's pretty much it. The characters are quite set. Now over time, as you get more, you can then start to choose who you take into a mission with you, while others work on side projects, technology, or heal their wounds or whatever. So this is arguably more of a personal thing, but I just really did not like any of the characters that I came across in the game. I don't think they really have any narrative depth or distinct or even interesting personalities. They don't seem to have any flaws or much interaction with each other than just a few one-liners.
How old is this building? 100 years, give or take?
Just needs a little elbow grease. And a whole lot of elbows.
Yes, grease, because this place doesn't have enough of that.
I do enjoy the overarching story of the game, set 5 years after Advent, and the idea of this hybrid human-alien city, but the characters themselves don't really seem to have any personal development or matter to the story at all, at least not from as far as I got. Now from a gameplay standpoint, it's certainly an interesting premise to be given preset characters and be forced to work with them and figure out good combinations of abilities, who to take together and all that. But I'm just not sure anything was actually gained by being given these characters rather than just creating my own and then figuring out the combinations. With my own characters, I get personally invested in them, and I just generally feel more attachment when deciding who's going to be doing what. And when I link my own combinations then between them, I feel pretty big-brained for figuring it out. And then if they die, it's pretty devastating, and that's kind of part of the fun. Now in Chimera Squad, characters can't actually die. They'll instead start bleeding out, and if they bleed out, you fail the mission. But on mission fail, you don't go back to the city screen and deal with the consequences of losing. You're forced to restart the mission or just load an earlier save. Having a character die is just not an option, and as such, it's not really possible to fail a mission. So let's go through what happens when a character's health reaches 0. Well, they begin to bleed out, and then you have a few turns to get to them and stabilize them. Once they're stabilized, they're safe, and you can continue the mission. If they weren't stabilized, they would bleed out and you lose, needing to restart. When they are stabilized, you actually don't need to carry them out of the mission either, they can just be left there. In fact, during an extraction mission where we had to get out, I extracted 3 of my 4 characters, and then I had the last one get shot and go down before they got out, and the mission just completed. So they were never stabilized or extracted, but I just won anyways. Then, back in the armory, they were just there.
How old is this building?
This sort of immortality, ironically, sucks the life out of the game. At the very least, I think you should have to carry everyone out of the mission, but I don't think that's an option in the game. I've never come across it anyway. When characters go down, they get a chance of being scarred in the overview screen, which affects their overall health. If you place them in training for 1 to 2 days, their scars will heal. Now, I don't know about you, but none of that makes sense to me, but that is how it works. So this reliance on unique characters has completely undermined a core pillar of the XCOM experience, which is having a character die during a mission but you decide to complete it anyway so that you can persevere against the overall meta threat that's going on. And it's doubly true for Iron Man players who would put up with a failing mission and potentially lose a full squad even and still have the fight go on. It's also seemingly removed the extraction concept of one soldier carrying out another so you can heal your wounded later or leave them to die because the risk is just too high of going back to get them. I mean, those are pretty cool moments and they just don't happen in this. So ultimately, while I like the overall story, I don't like the characters really, and I don't think anything beneficial has really been added to the formula by having them be unique. It may be a matter of personal taste, like I said, but I just haven't found them to be particularly likable or memorable, so I kinda hope Firaxis never do this again, with XCOM at least. The third major change is that the global map is gone and so is your base that you upgrade over time. Instead, the game is smaller in scope and focuses on just one city called City 31, which is a hybrid city where aliens and humans coexist. So City 31 is under threat from various factions launching terror campaigns, attempting to start a war and take control. The Chimera Squad are deployed to understand the motivation of these 3 factions, uncover their different plots by fighting various missions, and lowering the city's anarchy. There's 9 districts in the city, and if a district has 5 unrest, then it adds to city anarchy each day. So you're basically doing missions in the various districts to fight the unrest and to earn resources to make yourself more powerful. You're also doing missions specifically to learn about the factions you're fighting and advance the story. early on, you choose what faction you want to fight first, and I chose Sacred Coil, a sort of religious faction who use hybrids and psionic powers. This sets their plot into motion, and you have to uncover it by doing the main mission chains for them. In the city planning screen, you also have your assembly area, which is where you research new things. You have spec ops, where you can earn resources without doing missions. You have training, where you can rank up characters or heal wounds. And then you have armor and supply, where you purchase items and upgrade characters. The resources that you earn are Illyrium, Intel, and credits. Now, Illyrium and credits are used mostly for equipment from supply, whereas Intel is used on the city map itself. It kind of allows you to invest into a district, and that will then earn you passive income over time, depending on which one you choose. And then you can invest more into those same ones, up to 3 levels, and it'll grant you even better rewards if you happen to do a mission on that district. Intel can also be used on the scavenger market, which is like a timed market that shows kind of more rare and unique items on it. It shows up every now and then. So for me at least, Intel was definitely the most precious resource, at least early on. Interestingly, about Intel, if you knock enemies out in battle, you have a chance of obtaining extra Intel. So there's, again, this other incentive to actually capture enemies rather than kill them to gain more Intel, which is a pretty fun dynamic in the missions. So all in all, my time with the campaign map was just a little bit lackluster. I enjoyed the smaller feeling of dealing with the city, but I never really felt like there was much of a challenge in keeping the unrest down. As mentioned, you actually can't really fail missions in Chimera Squad, so I'm not sure where the struggle really would be in terms of having unrest build up. If you can't fail missions, thus allowing unrest to build in an area where you just tried to lower it, the only way it could get a leg up on you is if you were just to advance days without doing missions, which you can do, you know, maybe if you want your equipment to get better or something like that. But I never personally came across a mission that was so difficult where I had to just sit back and wait till my equipment got better. Now you might be wondering, am I like particularly good at the game? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not an XCOM purist. I haven't really played XCOM 2 since it came out, and I didn't spend that much time with it. I played a lot of Enemy Unknown, but for whatever reason, didn't really stick with 2 very long, and I never got War of the Chosen. So in this particular game, I consider myself just kind of average at XCOM games, and I'm finding this one really easy so far, which is obviously taken away from some of the enjoyment. So that's it for my review of XCOM Chimera Squad. Now essentially the core loop of XCOM gameplay still feels pretty great, and it is largely intact. It's just some of the meta stuff is kind of being eroded a little bit. Now I've just generally liked the different weapons, the class types, the enemy types, and abilities at my disposal. That all feels good. As a tactical turn-based battle game, it's great. And the feeling of ranking up over time and buying equipment does feel rewarding. The story is interesting to follow. It's just that the Breach gameplay gets a little bit tiresome kind of quickly, though it does occasionally have some pretty cool moments when you have like 3 or 4 different entry points and you really have to think about where you're going to go. The story, while interesting with the different factions, and it's a little bit preachy with regards to the harmony between humans and aliens all the time. There's no like kind of counter to that, and it's really kind of one-dimensional, I guess, in that regard. And it's sort of undermined by the cliche one-liners that the characters often spit out and the awkward interactions between missions. Now, despite me focusing on the negatives, which is mainly just because I feel like the new additions to the kind of XCOM formula just don't really work that well, I did enjoy just playing the core loop of XCOM gameplay again, especially for me after such a long break. It makes me want to go back and play XCOM 2 more than anything, really. Now, the game is 50% off for the next week, which I think is around $10 USD, and for that price, it's pretty hard to pass up, and I can at least appreciate that they tried something different with XCOM. I just kind of hope they don't try it again. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like and tell me why in the comments. Also, if you've played the game already, leave your thoughts down below. I'm quite interested to see what the more fervent XCOM players really think of the game. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.
The fire thinks I'm kindling.